welcome to the Boundless Book Club with the Emirates Literature Foundation. You are here with
Andrea,
Annabelle,
and me, Ahlam. Reading books is our only chance to live inside someone else's skin and see the world through their eyes. Whether it's crime, romance, or nonfiction, through books we are able to make ourselves at home in another person's mind and feel what it is like to be them. At the Emirates Literature Foundation, we all like to read great books that allow us to experience the worlds we do not inhabit. So today we're going to talk about some of those books and the reading list inspired by the Black Lives Matter movement. Hi guys, it's really good to see you and Annabelle and I being back in the office in a different setting.
Yes, so nice to see you back in the office.
It's odd. We're in the same building, but we are just separated. Yeah,
we're still having our meetings online, but it's good to be back, dressing up for work, being back into life. It's been really good to be back here.
Before we start talking about reading lists inspired by Black Lives Matter, I wanted to share a quote with you both, if that's okay, because I think it probably ties into how we all feel. But you can let me know that after I've read it. So Dr. Annemiek Saha is the author of Race and the Cultural Industries, and he co-wrote a report this year, which was titled Rethinking Diversity in Publishing. And the foreword was actually written by Bernardine Evaristo, who wrote Girl, Woman, Other, which is a book that everyone is still talking about. And it's available in full for reference, because the full report you should read. It's really interesting at spreadtheword.org.uk. But this is what he said when,
I was just going to say that we'll also post that link on our blog.
Yes, yeah.
For anyone who wants to see it.
Brilliant. This is what Dr. Annemiek said when he was introducing the report and talking about it in an article in The New Statesman. He said, in the build-up to the launch of the report, the murder of George Floyd inspired a new wave of Black Lives Matter protests with an unprecedented spread across the globe. Suddenly, our report into the issue of diversity in a very privileged industry felt trivial in relation to the literal matter of Black life and death. Yet, if racism is about the dehumanization of people of color and the higher rates of death in Black, Asian, and minority ethnic communities from coronavirus exposes how dispensably these lives are treated, one of the most powerful things about books, and especially the fiction written by authors of color, is how they can restore humanity. And I wanted to mention that before we started, because I think it probably echoes how we feel as members of a community who believe in the importance of the right book at the right time, and also in many books and diverse reading lists to combat the danger of what Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie said about the single story, the dangers of the single story. Do you feel that way?
It's true. It's like, you'll see a lot of people who will say, you should consume art or consume literature purely from an art standpoint and how good the work is. But when what's being presented to you is not equal and is not fair, then it's up to the individual person to make those choices to make sure that you are getting the different narrative, like you say there. And I think we discussed this in a previous episode where we looked at publishing numbers in the United States in particular. Andrea, I think you have those numbers.
Yes, Ahlam, I do have those numbers. So the statistics say that every year 84% of all books published in the US are by white authors. 5% are by Asian authors, 4% are mixed, 3% are Latin American, and the remaining 2% are Black authors. And this is obviously not representative of the population in any way. So that's quite telling that there are a huge number of people who just do not see themselves represented in the industry, which probably means that they don't see themselves represented in the stories that are being told either.
I mean, that is insane, right? In 2020, to think that there's such inequality in publishing, but also across all walks of life.
For example, when books are pitched, they're pitched in the context of something called a comp title. So, for example, if you like X, Y, and Z, you will like this. I mean, it's fairly common to see that on the cover of books, and that's how marketing works. You know, you have to give people context, which, you know, we understand, so that they'll think, okay, I like that other thing, I'll buy this thing. Fair enough. But Celeste Ng, who wrote Little Fires Everywhere, I don't know if you're familiar with that book. Yeah. So she's written an article about how this works and how it impacts minority communities, but from her perspective as a Chinese American author, which, yes, is different, but the issue is shared by various ethnic minorities and also Black communities in America. The article was called "Why I Don't Want to Be the Next Amy Tan," and she said, check any bookshelf of contemporary fiction and you'll see what I mean. Black writers get compared to Black writers, Jewish writers to Jewish writers, gay writers to gay writers. According to the publisher's description, my friend Preeta Samarasan's novel Evening as the Whole Day is sure to earn her a place alongside Arundhati Roy, Kiran Desai, and Zadie Smith. I teased her, a place on the shelf of brown women writers. So she goes on to say, worst of all, such comparisons place undue weight on the writer's ethnicity, suggesting that writers like Tan, Chang, and Kingston are telling first and foremost a story about being Chinese, not stories about families, love, loss, or universal human experience. And I feel the same way, you know, with the way a lot of books by writers of color are marketed.
I think that's a really good point. I mean, imagine how depressing it would be to spend years writing a book for you to then be marketed as the, you know, the two things that are the most obvious things when people look at you, like your skin color and your, you know, your height. It would be soul destroying. You put so much of yourself into this, and it's so much more than just what you happen to look like.
I had lunch with Azhar Nafisi, who is a Persian author, but a Persian American, and she's lived in Washington, D.C. for over 40 years. She teaches English literature in Johns Hopkins, and she says, anytime I'm invited anywhere to speak, it's always about oppressed women in the Middle East or veiled women who have taken off their scarves and such conversations. And she says, why can't I just go and talk about English literature? Why can't I talk about Ernest Hemingway? I mean, those are the kind of things that I teach and I talk about in my daily life. It's just crazy how people are boxed, but that's just the way of the world, right?
I mean, that's the slight sense of discomfort that I have from some of the reading lists that have surfaced because of Black Lives Matter, in that it's a bit of a catch-22. Because the publishing industry isn't serving those titles, that means that you need spotlights on diversity, you need those things to be highlighted. But at the same time, by putting all of these incredible writers, and, you know, many of them works of art that aren't specifically trying to teach white people about how to not be racist, by lumping them into that category, you are somehow taking away, like you said, the art, the creativity, the work that has gone into writing that piece of fiction, in the same way that a white writer has put in, you know, creativity, research, and isn't put in a category of other white writers.
Absolutely.
At this point, I really have to share a quote from Kylie Reid, who's the author of Such a Fun Age, who recently said, and I think she was probably channeling a lot of other Black creatives, saying, stop expecting life lessons from all Black art. Just let it be art. And you can feel her frustration in those words, I think.
Yeah, so true. And I actually wasn't planning on going first today and talking about my book, but what you said, I mean, I have to say, when I read the book that I'm going to talk about, I read Becoming by Michelle Obama, which was, you know, I think it was the most sold autobiography of all time. this, I mean, when I read this book, I just read it from a perspective of a woman struggling with work and life balance, you know, finding love, and then going through the struggles of marriage, remembering painful moments from your childhood, infertility, and all of those things that all women, you know, many women go through. And I just found her to be such a relatable person. And I didn't, although there was moments where she talks about obviously how she's perceived being the first African-American First Lady of the United States, and how the media portrayed her just because she was so foreign. This has never been seen before, you know, this moments where whenever she's serious, and because she's active in that she's not this like dormant First Lady who's only there to make sure the kids are okay in a complicated, you know, setting and hosting dinner parties. She was actually active. She had kind of initiatives of her own that she was pushing forward. She has things that she's passionate about, which she used the platform for. And then the media portrays her as this angry Black woman, and more often than not, she's like, in comparison with any other First Lady, my outfits have always been scrutinized, and you know, what I wear is never right, you know, if it's too much or too little. And there are some of those struggles that she goes through as an African American woman in her position.
Isn't that like the most universal thing for women, though, for the outfits to be scrutinized? Any woman in any spotlight.
Yeah, that's
so,
right.
You know, if anything, doesn't that make her feel so much more relatable?
So much more relatable, absolutely. And in reading this book, I didn't feel like this was the story of, you know, an African-American woman first and foremost. You know, she was just a woman going through life and trying to make it to who she was going to become. But I do love, obviously, there's one line which is iconic that she said, and everybody remembers from her time with her husband in office in the 2016 Democratic Convention, when she says, "When they go low, we go high," and that kind of feels like the theme of her life. Whenever people try to paint her with a certain brush or put her within their own ideas, it takes so much inner strength to say, no, I'm going to tell my own narrative. And even if, no matter how low they go, I'm going to come up and, you know, be the woman that I want to be, regardless of my situation, my color, my race, my, and whatever people want to shape me as. But definitely feel like this book was, as a woman, very relatable, and I'd recommend it to any woman anywhere in the world to read.
One of the interviews that I read, which again we will link to in the description as well, Tracy Sherrod is the editorial director of Amistad, which is America's oldest Black publishing imprint. She gave an interview, and it was all about kind of her journey to getting where she is today. And she didn't always work for Amistad. She wasn't always editorial director. Like everyone in publishing, she started somewhere else. And she was working for Henry Holt and Company. And in the early days of working for that company, in the 80s, 90s, etc., Barack Obama, before he became famous, tried to publish a book which has since been published, called Dreams from My Father, which was his early memoir.
Yeah.
And when it came in, she was told, we don't really publish people with non-traditional names. And so it was turned down because of that. And she said, she continued to say in the interview, the sad part about all that are the books that never got through. We don't even know what we're missing. I know a few very important books that were missing that would contribute to the dialogue, but those are books that no one wanted to buy at the time. And that's the real loss to publishing. And she was also asked about something that we've already talked about, which is the way lists of writers of color are kind of compiled. And I think her response to this is the most relevant, because as editorial director of Amistad, you know, they publish books by writers of color in all sorts of different genres. So in a way, like, their list is a massive curation of this. And she said in the 1970s, the first period in which Black books and Black authors were really making entryways into the business, boards of education realized that American history textbooks were not right. They didn't want to correct it because that would have been a big job. So what they decided to do was have supplemental materials about African American history, about Indian history, etc., etc. So that's how Toni Morrison got into the business, working on those kinds of texts. So initially, people of color literature was for the purpose of educating others and ourselves too about history. That has continued. The purpose of all books should be to educate someone about something. I also think books should be for escape, books should be for pleasure. If all Black books were about racism, where would we be able to escape it and get away from it? So,
wow.
Yeah, and we'll put the link to that below so that people can read that in depth, because it's a really interesting interview.
Yeah. And I think Michelle Obama herself as well, she had a guidance counselor tell her that she's not Ivy League material. And then
Really?
she goes off to Princeton. Yep.
Wow.
She goes off to Princeton. She, she's the first African-American, first lady of the United States. But there's people in your life who will try to bring you down and just don't see your potential, but that doesn't mean anything, as long as you believe in what you have and you keep your eye on the prize. I think that's what matters.
Yes. Speaking of the prize, I just think we have to celebrate that the British Book Awards just recently had its first ever Black and first ever female winner of Book of the Year. So it's taken an awfully long time to get to this point, but the author of Queenie was just named winner 2 weeks ago, which is such a wonderful book. So Candice Carty-Williams, so Queenie has been likened to, speaking of what we were talking about earlier, about how if you like this, you might also like that. People have called it a Black Bridget Jones, which personally I think is such a compliment to Bridget Jones, but for that to be the way to sell it feels wrong if you know the book. But to be fair, even though I think it's a compliment to Bridget Jones, that was such a massive hit that if that makes lots of people buy this book, that can only be a good thing.
Yeah,
True.
That's right. That's true. So all week I've been really fascinated with the name of Annabelle's choice for today's today's podcast, and my sister, the serial killer, and I'm dying to know all about it. So Annabelle, please tell us.
Okay, so this is a classic example of a book that I think belongs on a list of just amazing books that you have to read. It's called My Sister the Serial Killer by Oyinkan Braithwaite, and it does what it says on the tin. So I'm not spoiling anything by telling you what I'm about to tell you, because this is how the book opens. But it's a short, punchy novel, and it is about two sisters called Korede and Ayoola. And Korede is the older sister. She works in a hospital. I believe she's a nurse. And beyond the basic sibling rivalry that will probably be familiar to anyone who has siblings, Ayoola is kind of the popular one, the pretty one, according to everyone else around the sisters. She receives all of the attention, and Korede is kind of like the older, more sensible one who's always having to clean up her messes. And by messes, I mean murders. So that's where it kind of deviates from your classic tale of sibling rivalry. At the point that we meet the two sisters and Korede, she is cleaning up after her sister. She's disposing of a body. And this is the third kind of, I wouldn't say boyfriend, because as you read the novel, you discover that it doesn't really seem like she gets far enough into a relationship to call them boyfriends. But the kind of like the third male love interest that she has killed. And technically that makes her sister a serial killer. And there's this question throughout the book, and I'm not going to spoil it for anyone, as to whether or not it is a coincidence and she kills them out of self-defense, or whether, there's something more malevolent behind her motives and who she is as a person. And the key conflict of the story progresses beyond just whether or not she'll be found out, but also into the fact that Ayoola kind of makes every man who meets her fall in love with her because she's so beautiful. And one day she turns up at the hospital where Korede works, and Korede is sort of in love with the doctor that she works with at the hospital. And on a kind of basic level, the fact that he has eyes for Ayoola and wants to ask her out is already frustrating enough. But then there's this added layer of fear on behalf of the older sister that, oh my gosh, I love him, I can't have him, but my sister may also kill him. What do I do? And she's completely torn. And from that point, the novel just progresses. And it feels wrong to say that a novel about a serial killer is fun, but it does have this kind of wry humor that always keeps you on your toes. And also it's got a kind of family saga and kind of cultural conversation about sexism, and also about where they live, because I believe it's set in Nigeria. So there's a lot happening in a novel that's only like 200 and something or 300 pages. So I highly recommend it to everybody who likes everything.
Oh, wow. It sounds awesome. I feel like out of all of the books that you've recommended so far, I'm dying to read that one the most. It sounds so much fun.
It is fun. And it feels weird to say that about a book called My Sister the Serial Killer. But there you go.
It is super fun. I'm wondering what kind of, if we're doing that, if you like this, you might also like that. I don't know what you'd pair that book with. Any ideas?
Oh, I mean, it made me think of Dexter, the series, because it just, in the sense that someone is bad, but you still, I was going to say root for them, but you don't, because you're rooting for the older sister. You're not necessarily rooting for Ayoola. She's really annoying in the book, actually. But
yeah, and also I don't know if Dexter has the same sense of humor, does it? Because it is really funny.
Yeah, but that's why I was actually thinking Dexter, because the tone of it is lighter than it should be.
Yeah, okay. I didn't watch Dexter enough, I think. But yeah, that is an excellent recommendation.
So we've gone from Michelle Obama's Becoming to My Sister the Serial Killer. What kind of random pick is going to be the third one? Does it relate in any way?
I'm gonna say no. It is so I've found it really hard to choose, but I've chosen one of my favorite authors, actually, called Helen Oyeyemi, who is so talented. She wrote her first
had last year at the festival.
I know.
Almost.
She is so talented. She wrote her first novel when she was 18 years old, and that went on to win awards and so on. She is just phenomenal. And I haven't read all her books, but all the ones that I have read have this one thing in common, that they kind of sit really uncomfortably between sort of literary fiction and magical realism, and they just kind of throw you off balance while you're reading them. You're not quite sure what to think. And so the book I want to talk about is called Boy Snowbird, which is it's a few years old, and it's unlike anything else. Speaking of, if you like that, you might like this. I'll come up with something for the end, but it's about it's a story about this blonde, black-eyed young woman called Boy, who just a little side note there, that is so typical, that everything is slightly off. She's this woman called Boy, which already is sort of making you think, what's going on here? And she escapes this abusive father, mother missing in action. She escapes an abusive father by getting on a bus from New York to the last stop, which is a small town in Massachusetts. And this was in the time before racial segregation had ended. She arrives in this town, gets a job, and she's kind of this part of the story is a little bit of the American drifter story. She arrives somewhere, gets a job, lives in some kind of temporary lodgings, and she meets this man, Arturo, who is a widower with a beautiful daughter called Snow. And boy Arturo and Snow become this quite happy family unit. Boy and Arturo gets married, and she is quite close to Snow, until Boy gets pregnant and gives birth to a child who is black. At which point Arturo's mother accuses her of infidelity, which hasn't happened. And then it is revealed that things are not as they seem. And actually, when you read the story, I'm not going to give away the full story, but when you read it, absolutely nothing is what it seems. And it's hidden identities, and there is also this motif of people who are missing. So her mother is missing. There's other family members missing, and our main character, Boy, changes from this sort of abused young woman who's driven away from New York by this father to becoming sort of a I wouldn't say happy, but a loving, adjusted person when she's married and she's looking after her stepdaughter. And then she kind of changes again into some kind of evil stepmother when she has her own offspring. And it's phenomenal and really confusing and so good. I would say if you like this, if you like Haruki Murakami, you'd probably like this.
Oyeyemi. Oh, awesome.
So I like the fact that you said it's amazing and also really confusing, because before we all got together to talk about our books, I did obviously look up the basic plot, and from that basic plot description, I was very confused. And so then I went to the Goodreads comments, because I like to just see how other readers have responded to the book.
Yeah.
And the Goodreads comment section for Boy Snowbird is a hilarious space.
Brilliant.
It's very Marmite. It's full of people who go, "This is confusing but brilliant," and other people going, "What the heck? I want my money back."
Yeah, I think that is probably fair enough. It is completely Marmite. There's so much symbolism. It's just like, if you're in a book club, it's a perfect book because there's so much to discuss. It's so dense and so many different threads you can pull at, and then things just unravel.
So we've discussed some brilliant books, I think, stand alone and are amazing in their own right, and they may also come up on these reading lists for inspired by Black Lives Matter, or as kind of highlighting writers of color. And I think my takeaway from all of this is that these lists are great starting points and jumping off points. I think anything that encourages anyone to read something that's outside of their comfort zone or by someone from a different place and perspective is a good thing. But I think what being a reader means is making your peace with the fact that you're never done learning, and that you can read all of the books on those lists. You can read Why I'm No Longer Talking to White People About Race. You can read Queenie. You can read all of the books recommended, but you're never done learning.
There are too many great books and authors to talk about in one podcast. So do let us know who you think we've missed. Pop a comment below if you're watching on YouTube, or send us a message on social media. You can also email us on comms@emirateslitfest.com. We could not fit all our favorites into this one episode. So we've got a new post on our website, on our blog. That is elfdubai.org/blog. We've got lots of additional recommendations there, and that is all for this week. Join us next time. We'll be talking about our favorite classics, as well as some classics that are not our favorites, perhaps. Now, hit subscribe and give us a rating wherever you get your podcasts. Thank you and goodbye for now.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.